Good evening. We're delighted to have you present, each and every one of you. We're glad you're here. So thank you. Some of you have traveled on roads that just maybe haven't been so easy. It's been a lovely Canadian spring day, and yet we're not so used to it here. So just do take care on the road home. You don't have to rush home just as quick as usual. Just take your time on those slippy roads, please. We're going to be taking up this week coping as a Christian in family life. And this is going to be maybe practical at times, but we hope you understand that this is not a group therapy session. This is not going to end with all of us hugging and everything at the end and pats on the back and a real rah-rah cheering session. I am not a counselor. Okay, I'm not a counselor. I try my best to counsel from the Word of God, but I'm not a professionally trained counselor. If you have marriage problems that need a counselor, I can refer you to many. I have a team of psychiatrists and psychologists to whom I refer a lot of people. Because it just seems I meet a lot of people that want to tell me all about their mother-in-law. I have one of those. She's lovely. I'm her favorite son-in-law. I married their only daughter. So there we are. But seriously, there's a lot of people with a lot of problems. And you might be one of them. And so, what my role is to be a Bible teacher. And to come to the Word of God and say, what are the questions we should be asking? What is the focus that we should be having? And so I'm going to ask you, first of all, to turn to 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 16. I'll introduce my week in a moment, but I want this to be a governing, a dominant theme of this week, always in the back of our minds. 1 John 4, verse 16. We have known and believed the love that God hath to us. God is love. And he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Love, love, love. God is love. So as we're discussing all of our different issues, I want to take up tonight family and its beauty. Family and its beauty. And so tonight it might just not answer all of your favorite questions, but we do want to look at just what is the beauty of family that God has created. Sometimes we're looking in all the wrong places, we're looking at all the wrong people, we're looking at all the wrong points, and we don't really know what is the ideal, what is the beauty of family life. And tomorrow maybe we'll take a bit of an expansion of that and look at family and its blessing. Because there are blessings in families. This is not something to be endured. Family life can be enjoyed. And I'm sure you all are. It's just in a hypothetical place somewhere else. There are some people that are having just the odd little hiccup as they would have family issues. Family and its boundaries. You see, love is always discerning. Love is always careful. There's boundaries. We'll take a look at that on Wednesday. Thursday, family and its bombardment. Well, come and see what that's about. Family on Friday, family at its best. I had a family member say to me, "Oh, I think I'm free on Friday. What's Friday?" I said, "Family at its best." "Ah," he says, "why don't you take up family at its worst?" He says, "We know that way better." I did mention that was a family member of mine. So I'm an expert at the worst, but we're going to try to take a little closer look at the best. Tonight, family and its beauty. It starts with this key element as to who God is. And what I would like to do is try to help you understand that whenever we're dealing with things here on earth, it doesn't start here as if then we make God out of our particular experience. What it is that there is God that we need to bring into our experience. Please get that the right way. That's Acts 17. When Paul was standing on Mars Hill and speaking to all the Greek philosophers, he says, God is not made. He says, we are the offspring of God. You get that? God is not our ideas, because that can just change. We live in a postmodern era where people now turn churches into pubs. There was a day whenever we turned pubs into churches, but now we've got it the other way around, and just walk down the streets in Edinburgh or London, and it's just the marvelous designs of pubs and drinking houses and that, and they were all once churches. So we live in a postmodern age. You see why? Because if God is made by us, then we can just make a different God. But I don't think I need to convince this audience that we are made by God. Therefore, we start with God, and we let Him come into our relationships. We let Him come into our families. And we take what He is and have some understanding that we are to reflect Him. So whenever it says, God is love. Back in the days when tape recorders were a newfangled thing, and you could get a calculator at the local department store for $99. That was my 4th birthday present. I mean, every 4-year-old wanted a calculator, and it was just to check my sums. But and so we would have a little tape recorder. Actually, it was more like a big thing. And I am told that maybe some of the first words that were taped in when I was growing up, I was the eldest of 4, were these 3 words. And you can just imagine a little boy lisping it along, saying it, his first memory verse. John 3:16 will come in the years later, but just barely able to talk. God is love. It's more profound to me now than it was 50 years ago. So what does love look like? That's actually the key question whenever I hold some of my non-counseling sessions, because I'm not a counselor, but when people bring me an issue, or we have an issue in our house, my wife will sit down and we'll ask this as the fundamental starting question to all discussions. What does love look like in this case? What does love look like? And so whenever we think of beauty, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. We would understand that something that is beautiful, we would look at, and we would have an appreciation. And so what I want you to understand is the goal of tonight is that I want you to be asking continually, what does love look like? And we'll apply it in many different ways. Well, first of all, I'm going to challenge you maybe with an example or two. You would understand that if you saw a car parked beside the road, maybe one of your favorite brands, and it's sleek and it's dark and it's shiny and everything is right, but it's got a puncture. I don't know, I call it a flat, but I think a flat over here is something you live in, but the tire's got no air in it. Does everyone understand what I'm trying to say? It's got something's gone wrong here. Do you get out and do you curse the car? And do you talk all about how this car is not this and this car is not that, and we need a new car? We need a new car. Sometimes we behave like that, and society behaves like that. Whenever we talk about family values and traditional family and the nuclear family and all of this, and they say it doesn't work. And this world is actually trying to change the family idea because they say that the family doesn't work. May I suggest to you, that's like looking at a car with a flat tire and saying the design of the car is wrong. No, the design of the car might be perfect. But it doesn't run because something has come in and punctured it. And so what I want you to do is understand that the design of your family is not wrong. Marriage between a man and a woman, and having children, and having brothers and sisters living together in the same household is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with the design. but maybe you've been punctured. Maybe something has come in. But if you could just see the beauty of the design, you will do everything you can to get the thing up and running again. If you can understand that it is worth it, your family is worth all the effort that you can put into it, because it's beautiful. It's got a design to it, as we're going to learn, that reflects God himself. So we're not going to abandon the family. You're not going to abandon your marriage, are you? You're not going to rebel against parents. You're not going to be pushing people out of your home. You're going to make this work. You know what 2023 needs? It needs a lot of Christian, young, married people to say, I'm going to make this work. Because your grandparents did. And don't try to tell me they had just it so easy and they were more compatible. What I'm finding these days is that people are saying, this doesn't work, I'm out of here. I want you to see that it's worth everything you put into it. Everything you put into it. Well, let's go to the Song of Solomon. Yes, you heard me correctly. Song of Solomon. What I'll do is I'll come right in chapter 4. We're going to listen to the bridegroom speaking of his bride. Verse 12, Solomon's song here, chapter 4, verse 12. You'll find it just before Isaiah. Listen to her. Verse 10, rather. 4 and 10. How fair is thy love, my sister, my spouse. How much better is thy love than wine, and the smell of thine ointments than all spices. Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under thy tongue, and the smell of thy garments is like the smell of Lebanon. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse. A spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Thy plants are as an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, camphire with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrhs and aloes, with all the chief spices, a fountain of gardens, a well of living waters and streams from Lebanon. Awake, O north wind, and come thou south. Blow upon my garden, that the spices thereof may flow out. Let my beloved come into his garden, and eat his pleasant fruits. I am come into my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. And you have someone else come in. Eat, O friends. Drink, yea, drink abundantly. O beloved. There's something very precious about that. Read it with a holy mind, please. Solomon's song tells me of a fundamental relationship of a man and a woman. Something so precious, something so holy. I'm going to introduce to you in the family 3 fundamental relationships, and this is the first. The first is a husband and wife. I know that not everyone here is married. I know that. But this week is for family life. And I know that not every married couple have children. I know that. And I know that not everyone has a sibling, a brother or a sister. I know that. But just looking back at the very first family on earth, it started with a man and a wife. And just the very minimum, they had 2 boys born. Just the very minimum. I know there had to be more girls born and that, we know that. But just God focused and said, now here's the very minimum basics of a family. But it all comes to the very core of something so beautiful. This world has sensualized a man and a woman and his relationship. I'm glad the Song of Songs is in the Bible, because there is something so precious of the intimacy between a man and a woman that had the Bible left it completely out, I would have said, does God not know, like, our experience? Oh, he knows it completely, totally. If you want a very basic outline of Solomon's song, I think you can have the first, there's 6 chapters, so there's 8 chapters really, so I'll stick with 8. But I just want to divide it up into, very briefly, 3 sections. The first is when you seem to have a courtship. He's looking at her, she's looking at him, but it's all pure. I read to you the section where I think that they've come together. This is their wedding night. She's like a garden. She invites him, only him. He says, I've come into my garden. And then you seem to have the pronouncement of God. Eat, O friends. Drink, yea, drink abundantly, O beloved. God sanctions. Marriage is honorable. Marriage is honorable. And the bed undefiled. I think by the time you get to chapter 5 and verse 2, you have their first argument. Pardon? Never heard that explanation. You might hear a few things you've never heard of before this week, but they seem to have something that's come in between. And but then they seem to get it worked out again. She's beginning to think of how lovely he is, and they're back, and they get restored again. I just can't help but think that, I'm just going to steal it directly out of some Americans' comments that made one day, and he just summed it up in 3 words. He says the first section of this book, he says, is all about leaving. And the middle section is all about cleaving. And he says the latter section is all about weaving. I thought that just about sums up a good marriage life. There's all the leaving. They're just coming together, a man and a woman, his wife. They're going to be cleaving. Is that not what we would have? We'll refer to it a little bit later. Ephesians 5, perhaps, if I remember. A man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave unto his wife. You got the leaving and the cleaving. I wonder how many men have had their wives just tap them on the shoulder and say, I think we have a leave and cleave problem at the moment. Why is that? Well, he's just had lunch with his mother 3 days in a row, I suppose, and he's figured that she's just maybe not as happy as she could be about that. I don't know what your circumstances are. Have lunch with your mother, by the way, go ahead. But leave, cleave, but then there's a lot of weaving in life, isn't there? Putting it all together. And I just offer you those 3 words to help you understand the Song of Solomon. There are 3 fundamental relationships, and this is the key one in a family. It's a man and his wife. Did you notice, please, that it just seems to smell right? There's just a fragrance about this. This is a God-sanctioned, intimate scene. And it's pure. It's lovely. It's holy. It's not that you have a man and his wife and they're to be living for God and somehow have intimacies, and that's sort of the little animal side of their marriage relationship. My friend, that's not it at all. This is a God-sanctioned, God abundantly given, spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon. He says it's just like a flowing river. It's just like a well. It's like a fountain. It's just, and here's what she's saying: awake, O north wind. You know, look, just come what may. Let the cold, hard, harsh north wind come. All it'll do is it'll just smell right in my marriage. Oh, let the nice, lazy summer days of the south wind come. It might spice up, he says, and the spices thereof will flow out. Whatever comes, whether it's hard and cold or whether it's warm and wafting, he says, it's just going to be nothing but the spice and the fragrance and the loveliness. You say, you almost make marriage sound just lovely. That's the way God meant it to be. Something to be breathed deeply. Something to be drunk deeply. Something to be eaten and enjoyed. Something not, you'd almost get the sense that it's better than the intoxication of wine. Than the perfumes of the world. This is beautiful love. This is beautiful. This Can I say that this is beautiful and have all your senses energized, but it's not what I'm going to call the world's sensuality. She is reserved an enclosed garden totally for him. Did you get that? She invites him. There seems to be tremendous respect here. There seems to be an honor, an invitation, a respect. I read these things and I would just say, well, that's beautiful. Between a man and a woman. Could I take you please now to the book of Proverbs? You could divide up the book of Proverbs in several ways. Excuse me, but if Song of Songs is to me showing that first fundamental relationship of man and woman in a family, of husband and wife, we come to the book of Proverbs and you would have the parent and child, especially the first 8 or 9 chapters or so, but it just permeates it all the way through. And maybe I could get you to read with me, please. If you go to, first of all, is it Proverbs 10? Proverbs 10, Proverbs chapter 10. We've got all sorts of warnings between a parent and his son and so on, but Proverbs 10, now here comes the wise man who's just taking distilled experience and says, the Proverbs of Solomon, verse 1, a wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. Go to chapter 13. Verse 1. A wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner heareth not rebuke. Go to chapter 15, verse 20. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish man despiseth his mother. Chapter 28, verse 7. Chapter 28, verse 7. Whoso keepeth the law is a wise son, but he that is a companion of riotous men shameth his father. 4 times over you have in this book a wise son. The emphasis, again, I repeat to you in Proverbs. Proverbs is like a primer for princes. This is all about someone, a king, telling his son how to live. Giving him all the jewels of wisdom. All of his experience and what he has seen. And he's saying to his son, he says, now listen, he says, if you get anything, he says, you get wisdom. You get wisdom. Oh, bind her about your neck. She's a lovely ornament. She's going to help your speech. Wisdom. Wisdom is the principal thing. And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. He says, you be a wise son. He says, now you avoid that woman there. He says, he calls her the strange woman. So you have a parent that is bringing up a child so that there will be one day when they will form their own family, that they will be able to do it wisely. And so that's why I read to you. Because it's a great book to read. And by the way, you could do what my Sunday school teacher said, and he says, hey, there's a chapter in Proverbs for every day of the month. He says, go to it. He says, read the book of Proverbs 12 times this year. Well, that was easy, isn't it? That's easy. It's just a chapter a day. It's not a problem. I tell you, there's tremendous wisdom in here. And I call just a Song of Songs is for the man and his wife. The Proverbs is for maybe the child and the parent. Or the parent and the child. This is the second fundamental relationship in a family. It's between parent and child. It's a unique relationship, isn't it? Because that child has come from the parent. And that child coming from the parent, it's quite a remarkable. I know everything else is more of a permutation of this. I know that there's some that are adopted in and so on, and there are no less children I know, but I'm just pointing out that in family life, the fundamental relationship that is beautiful and God meant it to be beautiful is between a man and his wife. Pure, holy, devoted. And coming from that, there's a baby. Entrusted to that couple to raise. I think it was the late Mr. Leonard Mullen, who used to go up and down the glens of Antrim and get into homes that was quite remarkable how he could do it. And many people were brought into deep conviction of their sin and brought to a saving knowledge of the Lord Jesus just because of the way that Leonard Mullen was able to speak to them. And especially those that maybe had known the gospel but have gone off and got married and now they have a little baby. And he would be the first to arrive with a gift and so on. I don't know what you would buy a baby, but anyway, he seemed to know, or his wife did. And he would come in and he would have a wee thing for the wee, I don't know, they call them barns or something in that area. That in Canada, those are big sheds. But anyway, and so whenever they come in, this little baby and give the present, he would usually say something to the father. Cause she's lovely. He said, a bonny wee boy. What are you going to teach him? Goodbye. And you just leave that lingering. What are you going to teach him? The book of Proverbs is like that. A prince is born into your home. What are you going to teach him? What are you going to teach her? How are you going to teach her? You are going to form a relationship. You say, oh, I tell you, it's desperate. It is, isn't it? It's a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a challenge. They don't come with user manuals. They don't. And by the way, every one that the Lord gives you is different than the one before. Because you've got all the answers for number one. And then number two arrives and breaks the mold. For some of us, we had a child, number one. Now, by the way, you are sworn to secrecy that anything said in this meeting goes no further, and especially not to Bershane, okay? Child number one arrives, and we just give him a little, a little eye. Almost salutes you. Age 2, yes, Daddy, everything's fine. And the brethren came to me once when he's about 2 and said, we're praying for you. I said, oh, thank you. What for? That God will give you a normal child next time. I thought that was hardly fair. I thought it was my incredibly good parenting ability and so on. And by the way, the 2-year-old became 20-year-old and became a different, anyway, we'll leave that. But child number 2 came along. And in Canada, you bring your babies out to the meeting. You have the baby on Saturday, you bring them to the gospel meeting on Sunday to show them off. And that's just what you do in Canada. And well, after a few months, the brethren were all happy. And they were smiling one to the other. And the brother came up to me and he put his arm around me. He said, the Lord answered our prayer. The thing was a holy terror. Do you know what I mean? Just seemed to be bellowing and doing everything just like a normal child. So they come differently. Still responsible to teach. Still responsible to have a relationship with. It's a unique relationship. You see, most child psychology that I've learned is in aisle 13 in Sainsbury's, because I watch mothers dealing with children, and it drives me crazy, because I want to intervene. I would like to not only deal with the child, first of all, myself, because I think I could sort it quite quickly, but I would also then like to sort the mother. And that might take a little more time, but I would just like to get in there, and it's none of my business. It's not my child. It's not my child. Sometimes in my brighter moments, I remember to pray for the child as it's tearing down shelf 13 from aisle 13 or whatever, and mommy, yes, and then throwing a temper tantrum, then throwing the things at mommy, and mommy busy trying to pacify by giving it more. We'll deal with that relationship another time. But it's not my child. But I do have a responsibility. And there is a unique relationship in a family. How's it going? Is it beautiful? Is it beautiful? That's a challenge to every one of us. I'm going to tell you in a minute or two why it should be beautiful. But when I read Proverbs, I find that there's such a thing as a wise son. I see a loving, careful, disciplining father and mother working together. I see a responding son in wisdom or shame. That's a key relationship there. Well, what about our third relationship? I'm going to take it to Psalm 133. Psalm 133. I've tried to make this as easy as possible by giving you these three particular books, Psalms, Proverbs, and the Song of Solomon, to help you understand that God is one step ahead of us in understanding family life. The third fundamental relationship in a family is between brothers and sisters. Psalm 133, behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard, that went down to the skirts of his garments, as the dew of Hermon, and as the dew that descended upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. Life forevermore. I just read to you Psalm 133. There are lovely pictures in the Psalms. You could go to other Psalms and find that family life is like your wife is a fruitful vine. You just see dwelling there, lovely, and the children are like olive plants. They're just set around. They're just set around the table. And there's a lovely agricultural scene in family life, and you get. But this psalm here just gripped me, because there's a fragrance to this, just like there was a fragrance to a man and his wife and the preciousness of the perfume of their intimacy. So there is a preciousness whenever brethren dwell together in unity. Oh, you say, that's the local assembly, is it? Since when do you find that in the Old Testament? This is brethren dwelling together. Whether it's the tribe, whether it's a kindred, whether there's extended family, whether this is just a family. This is brethren. This is that third unique relationship in a family. So think of it as the man and his wife as the hub. And they've got these little spokes coming from them. But then this brotherly relationship is like a rim. We're going to be sticking lots of our wagon metaphors, aren't we? But you get the idea? Three fundamental relationships in a family. And God intends every one of them to be smelling like sweet perfume. God intends every one of them to be something of beauty. So that you can look at them and say, look at that family. She's a fruitful vine at his side. The family are now producing themselves. Wise sons being not a shame but an honor. Instruction given, obedience granted. Everything is just moving. You say, that's lovely. Too bad it's not true. Why isn't it? There's nothing wrong with the design of the human body, and yet we die. Isn't it tragic? I'm told that there's little cells inside me that are reproducing. And so when one of them is maybe had its purpose, then another one is reproduced, and the body should keep on living forever. Shouldn't it? I mean, if you have this element called life that keeps reproducing itself, why do we die? Why do people get old? What's happening here? Sin came in. Sin has destroyed God's perfect design of the human body. It is a work of God to set solitary in families. So if God does that, then God intends that families be a focus, a work of God, a fragrance, a perfume, something that is of beauty. Can I tell you something more? The fuel that each one of these runs on is the very essence of God. It's called love. It's called love. I've been describing it as perfume. I've been describing it as intimacy. I've been describing it as all sorts of things. But it's just the core value between a man and his wife is love. So what's love look like? The core value between parent and child with parent is love. So what does love look like? It's a different kind of love than the man-woman love. And then between a brother and a brother, or a brother and a sister, when I just say brethren, right, that just means male and female together, but they have a special, unique relationship. They all come from the same parents, and yet they're distinct but linked. And what helps them to live in harmony is love. But what's their love look like? And I think if we're able to identify those loves, and what love looks like in each case, we might be able to get a better fragrance. You see, not only does each one of these relationships have love at its core, I'm going to suggest to you that each one of these three fundamental relationships in the family has some eternal picture in view. Something that reflects the character of God, something fundamental about God and his love is going to be displayed in this thing called family. Now, you and I would all know that a fundamental man and his wife, I think what we need to do is turn to Ephesians, though. Turn to Ephesians 5. This is probably the easiest to explain. Probably the most well taught, is Ephesians in chapter 5. Why don't we just come in right at 24? Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Verse 31, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. Why? What is the fundamental reason why there is a man and a woman on earth? It's because it is a picture of a grander and of a greater and of an eternal entity and relationship. What is it? Christ and the church. This is called a mystery not because it's mysterious, but because we didn't know it until it was explained to us by the Apostle Paul. That there would not be distinction between Jews and Gentiles. The only distinction now, hardly use that word distinction, but the thing that we need to emphasize now in terms of relationship is we have Christ and the church. They will be united forever. Christ, what has he done for the church? He has died. He gave himself for it. You say that's love. So it is. What is the church doing for Christ? She's following him. She's adoring him. She's worshiping him. She's enraptured with him. She's giving her all to him. He gave his all to her. And she's going to give her all to him. And if that is the ideal eternal relationship that God has always had in his heart, he says, now I just would love to look down on earth and just see it. See all these little pictures of it. Each and every day. I asked a Japanese lady one day why she calls her husband Lord. Now, there is a wee language thing I'm going to take advantage of here. I listened to her, and there's different words you can use for husband, but she always called him Lord Master. Now, by the way, that is quite helpful, dear wife, if you want to encourage your husband to keep on going, and just call him my Lord. And I said, why I notice you do that. Oh, she says, I have to. I said, oh dear, you don't think it. She says, no, it says it in the Bible. Sarah called Abraham Lord. And she says, I need to do that. She said, I need to honor him as Lord. And furthermore, she says, every day, she says, I have to be to my husband as the church is to Christ. So she says, if God is to see the church in Christ in my relationship, she says, I need to call him Lord. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to be married to a woman like that? Wouldn't it be great? And so I listened carefully to what my wife calls me. You know. And do you know what she calls me in Japanese? Her Lord. Master. I thought, phew, that's good. Now I know there's a wee language thing there. I won't tell you what he calls her. I mean, I use a special word for my wife in Japanese, but most of the Japanese men call their wives the thing in the house. So it's just a language thing, okay? And I call them the honorable hidden one, and there's different things you can use. But I just found the heart of that Japanese bride. There was just something quite innocent and lovely about it. I know you ladies here are just, inside you're just shaking your heads and saying, oh, the poor girl, she probably had a rude awakening by about year 3. And so, well, I haven't asked her lately. But I tell you what, there was something of a sweet perfume with that attitude. Wasn't it? The same fragrance that I smell when I see husbands sacrificing themselves for their wives. And I can barely go any further without thinking of the president of the Columbia University in New York, whose wife descended into quite a very difficult, she had a disease, it seemed to be much worse than dementia, but she went into quite a spiral in her mind as her mind was, she was losing her mind. And what he did at the top of his career, recognized that she needed care. And he was told and encouraged that because he was such an important man, that he should put her in a home. And he stood up one day and said, gentlemen, I stood beside her and I made a vow, in sickness or in health. I'm resigning my position to look after my wife. He said there was nothing wrong with her legs. She could walk so fast, and he would go with her. She would come with him before it got too bad, and she would be very agitated getting on an airplane and so on, and perhaps the airplane was delayed, and one day it was, and it's just a wee cameo, a wee interesting story that he tells in his book, but she was walking back and forth, and she'd go up to the counter and say, when is the plane coming? When is the plane coming? Oh, it's coming in an hour, whatever. Okay, and then she'd come and sit down, and then she'd be roaring off down there, and he would go with her and help her and bring her back, and then she'd be up, and he'd go and help her and bring her back and everything, and he was just in front of all the waiting rooms. I don't know, we're all kind of self-conscious, but in front of a waiting room full of people, I mean, you get to know one another after about an hour or two, and so they watched this man, the former president of a large university, helping his demented wife back and forth and this and that. There's a rather stylish lady sitting beside him, and she muttered something under her breath. And his heart was just, he was just gripped. He says, I was just about my breaking point. And he says, here's this woman, all stylish and everything, muttering under her breath. So he turned to her and said, excuse me? What did you just say? She said, no, it's not. I'm sorry. No, he says, what did you say? She said, I wish I could find a man that would love me like that. I tell you, there must have been a sweet perfume in that airline waiting room. Because there was a man who was willing to take humiliation, all because he made a vow. I think some of us men need to realize what we vowed. I think some of us women need to realize what devotion is. It's a picture of Christ in the church. It's eternal. It's beautiful. There's another relationship that is eternal. It's the relationship between the eternal Father and the eternal Son. I'm not going to turn to any further passages, I don't think, because I've noticed I'm running out of time, but if fidelity is going to be on display forever between the church and Christ, then that loyalty of a son to a father is also going to be on display. I hear him say on the garden floor, Abba, Father. What a salutation. All things are possible with thee. I call that sanctification. He set aside his Father in his heart. All things are possible unto thee. Let this cup pass from me. What a supplication. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. What a submission. The eternal Son, in absolute, total loyalty to his Father, got up off that garden floor, and no matter what it was going to cost, he was going to obey. That's a relationship that's going to be on display forever. The Father and the Son. The Son is going to take the kingdom. He's going to present it to the Father. The Father is going to be all in all. And I can barely understand it, but there is an eternal relationship there that needs to be put on display in a family between parents and child. Even the Lord Jesus took care of his mother. You would know that. And so when I think of this grand, eternal aspect of the Godhead, where the Father gives to the Son all authority, all words, the Father presents over and over again, and the Son responds in obedience and total committed loyalty. What a relationship. If there's any teenager here and you're thinking, just giving mom and dad a bit of a kick. If you're a Christian teenager, you just remember right now that your relationship with your father should represent the relationship of Christ with his Father. The third relationship, if the relationship of a man and his wife should represent the fidelity between Christ and the church, if that relationship between parent and child should be like between the Son of God and the Father, I'll call that loyalty, then unity is displayed among brethren. I was thinking about this. Is this going to be, is this a picture of brethren getting along? A picture of brethren loving one another? Is it a picture of anything eternal? So I went to the Bible. I find in Psalm 22 that the Lord Jesus says that, I'll declare thy name in the midst of the congregation. That's Christ. Among all the brethren. Hebrews 2 tells us he's not ashamed to call them brethren. And as I thought about this, I thought, what is the great congregation? There is a multitude in heaven that is going to be completely and totally unified as they sing and they worship and they praise Christ. And then I come to the end of the book of Revelation and I find that the servants are going to behold him and his name will be written in their foreheads, and there'll be a unity in song, there'll be a unity in service, there's a great congregation, and they'll all be unified then. And Mr. Spurgeon spoke about the brethren that were at Plymouth. And he just said, he says, oh, they're rightly dividing the word, but he says they're wrongly dividing themselves. They just can't get along. They're not unified. I wonder, brethren, if we recognize that we will have an eternal unity in heaven, in praise and in purpose, in song and in service, as we will be totally unified and devoted That's the way we're meant to be demonstrating love right now and help right now for one another. I leave that for your consideration. Each of the fundamental family relationships has an eternal picture that it should be demonstrating, has something that it should be representing. God created families so that they would be a reflection of himself and his eternal purposes. And you say, all I thought I did was fall in love and we had some babies. Lift up your eyes. So, dear brother, when you go home tonight and you're looking in the corner of your eye at your wife and your wife's looking at you and you're kind of feeling a little bit guilty, you should. Your relationship is not demonstrating that love just yet as it should. Is it? And if there's a parent and treating children in a way that's more selfish rather than selfless, you just remember that your parent-child relationship should be representing the Father and the Son. Is that how it is? And you just remember, you siblings, and then I expanded out to being all the brothers and sisters I know in the family of God. You just remember that there is a unity that God demands, and he will bless forevermore, he says. Oh, he says, it's like a fragrance, brethren dwelling together in unity. Well, how was Christmas? I don't actually mean, did you jump around the tree or whatever people do with trees and have turkey and all that? I don't actually mean that. You know what I've had people phone me and tell me? I can't take any more. They've been here a week and a half. Isn't it strange that those we love and those that we dwell with, it's so difficult sometimes. So difficult. But what I want you to understand is that it can be beautiful. I'm so glad it shall be beautiful. In a coming day, each one of these relationships shall be on display. But I'm going to go home tonight and say, is my marriage, is my parent-child, siblings, how is it? I leave it for your consideration, brothers.